When pressure enters a room, it does not announce itself. It tests you quietly. Most people fail before anything even happens because their mind starts moving, arguing, defending, and predicting catastrophe. They become slaves to their own nervous systems, reacting to shadows rather than reality. They feel the tighten in the chest, the shallow breath, the sudden narrowing of vision, and they mistake this biological noise for the truth. The ancient Japanese samurai understood that the battle is not won when the sword is drawn, but in the silence before the strike. They cultivated a state of being that allowed them to walk through fire without being burned, a mental fortress built on specific, unbreakable laws. To the modern eye, this looks like superhuman discipline, or perhaps a lack of emotion. But it is neither. It is actually a system of removing the unnecessary until only the essential remains. It is a technology of the mind, designed to keep a human being upright when the world tries to knock them down. Introduction. This is not a lecture on productivity hacks or morning routines. It is a story about a man named Ren who represents the modern condition, overwhelmed, reactive, and constantly exhausted by the noise of his own life. Ren was not a failure by societal standards. He had the job, the apartment, the trappings of adulthood. But internally, he was a house of cards. He lived in a state of constant, low-level panic, his attention fractured by notifications, deadlines, and the expectations of others. Like many, Ren believed that discipline was a form of punishment, a way to force himself to do things he hated. He thought willpower was a muscle he had to strain until it snapped. He was drifting, carried away by the currents of other people's urgencies, and deep down, he knew that if a real storm came, a tragedy, a loss, a true crisis, he would break. He was tired of being fragile. He was tired of his own mind bullying him. But beneath all of it, he found a single impulse to stop running. He began to study the principles of the samurai, not to learn how to fight physically, but to learn how to engage in the warfare of daily existence. He discovered that the warrior class of feudal Japan did not rely on motivation. They did not wait to feel like it. They relied on a code that governed their internal world regardless of external chaos. This code was built on laws of iron discipline. These were not abstract theories written for scholars. They were survival mechanisms written in blood. Today, we will walk through Ren's transformation as he applies these ancient laws to a modern existence. We will see how he moved from a state of fragility to one of sovereignty. We will explore how concepts like the immovable mind and lingering awareness are not just for the dojo, but for the boardroom, the difficult relationship, and the quiet moments alone. This is an instruction manual for reclaiming your own mind from the chaos of the modern world. Chapter 1. The Art of Enduring, Gammon. The first law Ren encountered was gammon. In the West, we often translate this simply as patience, but that is a weak, insufficient definition. Patience implies waiting for something to be over. Gammon is different. Gammon is the capacity to endure the unbearable with patience and dignity. It originates from a time when commoners and samurai alike had to withstand famine, harsh winters, and social oppression without complaint. It is an active state of holding one's ground. For Ren, his famine was not a lack of food, but a lack of peace. He was working on a project that was failing, with a boss who was unjust, in a career that felt hollow. His instinct was to complain, to vent to friends, to seek validation for his suffering. He wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. He spent hours rehearsing arguments in the shower, fueling his own resentment, leaking his energy into a void of frustration. But gammon demanded something else. It demanded that he hold his tongue and perform his duty without leaking energy through complaint. Ren realized that every time he vocalized his misery, he validated it. He gave it power. He solidified the identity of the victim. He began to practice gammon by simply refusing to react to the minor irritations of his day. When the train was delayed, he did not check his watch and sigh. He stood still and breathed. When he was criticized unfairly, he listened without defending his ego, searching for the kernel of truth rather than the insult. He learned that silence is not passivity, it is a container for strength. This was not suppression, where you push emotions down until they explode. This was sovereignty. By practicing gammon, Ren stopped being a victim of his circumstances. He realized that the samurai did not endure hardship because they were numb, but because they understood that their internal state was more important than their external comfort. He began to see that most modern suffering is self-inflicted through resistance. We fight against reality instead of enduring it with grace. As Ren stopped fighting the small inconveniences, he found he had a reservoir of energy left for the things that actually mattered. He was learning to weather the storm by becoming the rock, not the leaf. Chapter 2. The Immovable Mind. Fudoshin. As the weeks passed, the pressure on Ren increased. A crisis emerged in his personal life, a significant financial hit that threatened his security and future. The old Ren would have spiraled into anxiety, losing sleep, pacing the floor, and imagining the worst-case scenarios. He would have been paralyzed by the what-ifs. This is where he needed the second law, Fudoshin. Fudoshin translates to the immovable mind. It is a state of psychological stability that is not disturbed by internal delusion or external shock. The samurai texts describe warriors who could remain calm under a rain of arrows, acting only when the decisive moment arrived. It is not about being fearless. It is about not being moved by fear. It is the ability to look at a terrifying reality and not blink. Ren realized that his mind was constantly moving, jumping to the future, regretting the past, shaking with fear. He lacked Fudoshin. To cultivate this, he had to change his relationship with fear itself. He stopped trying to eliminate the fear and instead decided to act in spite of it. One afternoon, he sat down to look at his finances. His hands were shaking. The fear was screaming at him to close the laptop, to distract himself with entertainment, to run away. But he remembered the immovable mind. He breathed. He looked at the numbers. He refused to look away. He understood that Fudoshin is not the absence of emotion, but the refusal to be dragged by it. It is a stance you return to again and again. When a colleague tried to provoke him into an argument, Ren felt the anger rise, the heat in the chest, the urge to snap back, the desire to win the verbal spar. But he observed it. He did not move. He let the anger pass through him like wind through a net. In that moment of non-reaction, he gained total control of the room. He saw that the person yelling was weak, controlled by their impulses, while he remained solid. He was beginning to understand that true power is the ability to choose your response, even when the world demands a reaction. He became the eye of the hurricane. Chapter 3. The Austere Path. Shugyo. Discipline requires fuel, and that fuel is generated through friction. This is the principle of Shugyo, austere, harsh training that forges character. In the ancient schools, practitioners would train barefoot in the snow, stand under freezing waterfalls, or fast for days. The goal was not masochism. It was not suffering for the sake of suffering. It was to harden the spirit so that normal life felt easy by comparison. It was about raising the baseline of what the human spirit could endure. Ren realized his life was too soft. He was addicted to comfort. Temperature control, soft chairs, easy entertainment, palatable food, constant dopamine. This softness had made his will weak. When you never feel cold, a slight draft feels like a blizzard. When you never feel hunger, a missed meal feels like starvation. He had lost his edge because he never sharpened it against resistance. He decided to introduce voluntary hardship into his life. He began waking up at 5 a.m., not to work, but to train. He ran in the rain, feeling the cold water soak his clothes, refusing to speed up to get it over with. He took cold showers, standing under the icy water until his breathing regulated. He fasted for 24 hours once a week, learning to sit with the sensation of hunger without panic. These were small acts of Shugyo. At first, his mind rebelled. It gave him 1,000 reasons why he should stay in bed, why it was unhealthy, why he deserved a break, why this was unnecessary. But he treated his mind like a spoiled child that needed to be ignored. Through Shugyo, Ren learned a critical lesson: you do not negotiate with yourself. When the alarm went off, his feet hit the floor before his mind could argue. This created a new identity. He was no longer a man who hoped he could handle difficulty. He was a man who sought it out. This physical hardening bled into his mental state. When a deadline was moved up at work, causing panic among his team, Ren felt a strange calm. He had already done the hardest thing he would do that day before the sun came up. The office stress was nothing compared to the freezing rain. He had expanded his capacity for suffering, and in doing so, he had expanded his freedom. Chapter 4. No mind. Mushin. With his will hardened, Ren began to experience moments of strange clarity. This was the fourth law. Mushin, or no mind. It is a state free of hesitation and ego, where thought and action become one. Swordmasters trained repetitive cuts for years, so that in a duel, they did not have to think, "I will strike now." The body simply moved. The gap between perception and action was eliminated. Ren had spent his life overthinking. He would write an email, delete it, rewrite it, worry about the tone, and second-guess his intelligence. He would replay conversations in his head, wondering if he sounded smart enough. His ego was a constant filter, clogging the flow of his actions. He was watching himself live rather than actually living. This self-consciousness was a heavy burden, slowing him down and making him clumsy. Mushin required him to trust his training and remove the I from the equation. He began to practice this by focusing intensely on the task at hand, removing all multitasking. When he wrote, he just wrote. When he listened, he just listened. He stopped narrating his life in his head. He found that when he stopped worrying about how he looked or if he was doing a good job, the quality of his work improved immensely. One day, during a major presentation, the technology failed. The screen went black. The slides were gone. The old Ren would have panicked, apologized profusely, and felt the shame of the ego being damaged. He would have worried about what the executives thought of him. But the new Ren, anchored in Mushin, simply continued speaking. He didn't think about the failure. He just adapted. He moved to the whiteboard and drew the diagram from memory. There was no hesitation, no mind getting in the way of the action. He was pure function. He realized that the ego is the heaviest thing we carry. It is the source of all awkwardness and hesitation. When you put it down, when you stop caring about being seen, you can move with terrifying speed and accuracy. Chapter 5. Incremental Perfection. Kaizen. The grand gestures of discipline are easy to romanticize. We love the montage of the training sequence. But the samurai lived in the details. This is Kaizen, relentless incremental self-correction. While the term is used in modern industry to describe manufacturing efficiency, its roots are in the martial practice where a swordsman would refine a single form thousands of times, adjusting a foot angle by 1 degree. Ren had always looked for the magic bullet, the one life hack, the one book, the one seminar that would fix everything overnight. He wanted a revolution, not an evolution. But Kaizen taught him that there is no magic bullet, only a million small adjustments. Excellence is not an act, but a habit formed by correcting the smallest errors. Ren began to look at his life as a system. He didn't try to change everything at once. He focused on 1% improvements. He fixed his sleep schedule by 15 minutes. He organized his workspace so that he wouldn't waste mental energy looking for things. He refined his diet, removing 1 piece of junk food at a time. He reviewed his day every evening, asking, where did I leak energy? Where was I sloppy? Where did I lose my temper? This was not about being a perfectionist in a neurotic way. It was about respect for the craft of living. Ren realized that how you do anything is how you do everything. If his car was messy, his mind was messy. If he was late to a meeting, he was late to his own life. If he cut corners on the small stuff, he would cut corners when it mattered. Kaizen turned his daily existence into a dojo. Every action was an opportunity to practice precision. He found that these small, non-negotiable actions compounded over time. A year of Kaizen transformed him more than a decade of setting ambitious New Year's resolutions that were abandoned by February. He was building a skyscraper, brick by brick. Chapter 6. Lingering Awareness, Zanshin. There is a moment after the action that defines the master. This is Zanshin, lingering, continuous awareness. In archery, Zanshin is the continued focus after the arrow has been released. The archer does not drop the bow or celebrate. They remain in the form, watching the arrow's path, ready for the next moment. They do not mentally clock out just because the shot is fired. Ren realized that modern life is the opposite of Zanshin. We are a culture of premature celebration and instant distraction. We finish a task and immediately grab our phones for a dopamine hit. We close a deal and rush to the bar. We are constantly rushing to the next thing, leaving the current moment half finished. We leave doors open, we leave conversations hanging, we leave our minds scattered behind us. Ren began to practice Zanshin by fully completing every action. When he finished work, he didn't just slam the laptop shut and run. He saved his files, cleaned his desk, and mentally closed the chapter of the day. When he had a conversation, he didn't check his watch or look over the person's shoulder. He stayed present until the other person had completely finished expressing themselves. He learned to hold his focus even when the main event was over. This prevented the sloppiness that causes most accidents in life. Most mistakes happen in the transition, in the moment we think we are safe and drop our guard. We trip when we are walking away. We say the wrong thing when we think the interview is over. Zanshin taught Ren to live with a constant low-level alertness. It was not paranoia, it was presence. He noticed things others missed, the tone of a client's voice, the tension in a friend's face, the shifting atmosphere of a room. He was actually there, not just physically, but with his total awareness. He realized that discipline is not just about the explosion of energy, but how you holster the weapon afterward. Chapter 7. Walking Alone, the Dokodo. Finally, Ren arrived at the ultimate test. The legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, a week before his death, wrote the Dokodo, The Way of Walking Alone. It contains precepts of radical self-reliance, including the famous line, "Do nothing which is of no use." This was the filter Ren applied to his entire life. But implicit in the Dokodo is a harder truth. To live by a code, you must be willing to be separate. Ren had to accept that this path of discipline would separate him from the herd. Most people bond over shared weakness. They bond over complaining, over gossip, over wasting time. When Ren stopped participating in these rituals, he lost friends. He was no longer fun in the way they wanted him to be. He didn't want to get drunk on Tuesdays. He didn't want to spend 3 hours discussing the failures of others. He began to audit his life with a ruthless blade. Friends who only wanted to drag him back to his old self? Gone. Habits that drained his dopamine without giving a return? Gone. Social obligations that served only to feed his vanity? Gone. He learned to be alone without being lonely. He realized that most people surround themselves with noise because they are terrified of the silence where they might meet themselves. They cannot sit in a room alone for 10 minutes without reaching for a distraction. Ren embraced the solitude of the Dokodo. He found that when he stopped seeking validation from the world, he became dangerous in the best sense of the word. He was self-contained. He didn't need the applause. He didn't need the reassurance. He had his code, and that was enough. He understood that to master oneself, one must be willing to be misunderstood by others. He walked his path, not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knows exactly who he is. He had traded popularity for power, and he never looked back. Conclusion. The lesson was never about becoming a samurai. It was about becoming human in a world that wants to turn you into a machine. Ren's story is not unique. It is the potential story of anyone who decides to stop reacting and start living. It is available to you right now. But it requires a price. It requires gamen to endure the silence. It requires fudoshin to stand firm when your emotions scream at you to run. It requires the pain of shugyo, the clarity of mushin, the precision of kaizen, the awareness of zanshin, and the courage to walk the path of the Dokodo alone. The world will try to break you. It will send pressure, chaos, and noise. But you have the capacity to build a fortress that cannot be breached. It starts with a single decision: to stop being a slave to your impulses and to become the master of your own mind. It is a stance you return to again and again until it becomes the way you stand in all things.